The plan started on a Tuesday in October, 3 weeks before my 68th birthday, and I didn't see it coming until it was already half finished. My husband Walter had been gone for 7 months. 7 months of learning how to sleep on my side of the bed again, how to make coffee for one, how to answer, "How are you doing?" without crying in the cereal aisle at the Kroger on Maple Street. We'd been married 41 years. He died on the Wednesday morning in March, sitting in his recliner with the newspaper open on his lap and a half-drunk cup of coffee on the side table. The paramedics said it was fast, peaceful even. I held his hand anyway, talking to him for a long time after they arrived, because I wasn't ready to stop. Our son Trevor was at my door by noon that day. He held me while I cried, and I thought, in that raw, hollow way you think things when grief is brand new, that I was lucky to have him. I should have paid more attention to how quickly he started asking about the will. We'd built a good life, Walter and I. He spent 30 years as a structural engineer. I worked part-time in medical billing until the kids were grown, and then full-time after that. We paid off the house in Cartersville, Georgia in 2011. We had retirement accounts, some modest investments, and a savings account that Walter managed carefully, and I never had to worry about. After he passed, the estate attorney told me I was comfortable. Not rich. Comfortable. The house alone was worth close to $400,000, and the rest together was another 200 and change. Trevor is 43. He married a woman named Simone 8 years ago. I wanted to like her. I genuinely tried. She's one of those people who is always performing, always presenting a version of herself that's a little too polished, a little too prepared, like she rehearsed her personality before she walked into the room. She calls me by my first name, which is Wanda, and she says it the way you'd say the name of a town you're only passing through. Their daughter Piper is 6. She's the best thing about any of it. The Tuesday in October, Trevor called and asked if he could come by for dinner. Just him and Simone, he said. Piper was with her other grandparents. I made pot roast because it was Walter's recipe, and I always feel him in the kitchen when I make it. We ate, and it was pleasant enough, and then Simone refilled her wine glass without being asked and said, "Wanda, we've been thinking about your situation." My situation? I set down my fork very carefully. Trevor started talking then, in that voice he uses when he's rehearsed something and is trying to sound like he hasn't. He said they were worried about me. Said the house was too big for one person. Said that managing finances after losing a spouse was known to be overwhelming, that there were studies about it, that people made mistakes. He said they wanted to help me. He said that what made the most sense, financially, practically, logically, was for them to have joint access to my bank accounts so they could keep an eye on things. He also mentioned, very casually, that his company had offered him a position in Charlotte, and that if they were going to move, they'd need to sell their condo. And wouldn't it just make sense, really, for them to move in with me temporarily while they looked for something in the area? Temporarily. I looked at Simone. She was watching me with the particular expression of someone who already knows what they want and is waiting to see if they're going to have to fight for it. I told them I needed time to think about it. After they left, I sat in Walter's recliner, something I almost never did, and I looked at his coffee mug on the side table, which I still hadn't moved, and I said out loud, "Walter, what do I do?" He didn't answer, of course, but in the morning I called my old friend Roberta, who'd been through her own version of something like this with her stepchildren years back, and I told her everything. Roberta said 3 words, "Call your lawyer." I called Martin Eckhart the next morning. Martin had done our estate planning for 15 years, a soft-spoken man from Decatur who wore bow ties and never rushed you. He listened to everything I said. Then he said, "Wanda, do not give anyone joint access to those accounts. Not your son, not your daughter-in-law, not anyone. You are not incapacitated. You are grieving. Those are not the same thing." I knew that. I just needed someone to say it out loud. I told Trevor the following week that I didn't think the account access was a good idea right now, and that the house wasn't ready for guests, my word, guests, on a long-term basis. He took it better than I expected. He said he understood. He said they'd figure something else out. That should have been the end of it. Thanksgiving was at my house. It always had been for 20 years. I'd fought for that tradition even when the kids were teenagers and wanted to go to friends' houses, and I'd kept it after they left home, and I'd kept it even the year Walter was too sick to sit at the table for very long. He'd come down in his robe and eat a few bites of turkey and squeeze my hand and call it perfect. I set his place at the table still that first Thanksgiving without him. I don't know why. I just couldn't not. Trevor and Simone arrived with Piper and 2 bottles of wine, and Simone's parents, who I had not been told were coming. Her parents are named Douglas and Vivienne. They're from Alpharetta. They're both retired, and they have the particular energy of people who consider themselves a class above wherever they happen to be standing. Douglas shook my hand at my own front door like I was a hotel concierge. Vivienne told me the centerpiece was sweet. We got through dinner. Piper sat next to me and told me about kindergarten and her best friend, whose name she changed 3 times during the story, and that was the best part of the whole day. After the plates were cleared and Piper had fallen asleep on the couch with the dog, Simone poured herself a third glass of wine and looked across the table at me and said, "So Trevor mentioned you'd reconsidered the living arrangement." I said I hadn't. Trevor said, "Mum, come on, we talked about this." I said, "We talked about it," and I said no. Simone said that her parents needed somewhere stable, that their condo in Alpharetta was being sold, that they were older and it made sense for family to be together, that I had this big house all to myself and it seemed, her word, selfish to sit on all that space when people who needed it were right there. I looked at my son. He looked at the tablecloth. I said, "Simone, this is my home. Walter and I built this home. I'm not going to have this conversation at my Thanksgiving table." What happened next took about 4 seconds. Simone stood up. She picked up her wine glass, a full pour, a good red that I'd bought specifically because I knew she liked it, and she threw it. Not toward the wall, not at the table. At me. It hit my cheek and the bridge of my nose. The glass didn't break, but the wine went everywhere, and the glass itself caught my cheekbone hard enough that I felt it. There was a moment of total silence. Then Piper woke up on the couch and called out, "Grandma Wanda." I stood up, very slowly, and I said, and I surprised myself with how steady my voice was, "Douglas, Vivienne, I think it's time for everyone to go home." Trevor said, "Mom, she didn't mean." I said, "Everyone, now." I went to the bathroom and looked at my face in the mirror. There was a welt forming on my cheekbone, wine dripping off my chin, and mascara starting to track down. I looked at myself for a long moment. Then I took out my phone and I texted Martin Eckhart. I knew it was a holiday. I texted anyway. I said, "I need to meet with you as soon as possible. Something has happened and I need to make changes." Then I called my neighbor Connie, who is 71 and a retired ER nurse, and the most competent person I have ever known in my life, and I told her what happened. She was at my door in 6 minutes. She drove me to urgent care, where the physician on duty documented the contusion on my cheekbone and the soft tissue swelling and asked me, with professional gentleness, whether I wanted to speak to a social worker. I said no. I said I was handling it. I was handling it. Connie drove me back home after. The house was empty. They'd gone. But something felt wrong the moment I walked in. I couldn't name it immediately. Connie made tea while I walked through the room slowly, and it wasn't until I reached the small office off the hallway, Walter's office, where he kept files and his old drafting tools and a locked box in the bottom drawer that held our important documents, that I saw the drawer was open. The lock had been forced, not broken entirely, but bent, and the folder where I kept copies of the will and the deed to the house and the beneficiary forms for the retirement accounts was out of the box and sitting on the desk, open. Several pages were missing. I stood there for a moment with Connie behind me, and I thought about all the times I'd given Trevor a key to this house because I trusted him. I thought about the summer he was 17 and broke the back window, sneaking out, and came to me the next morning and confessed because he said he couldn't sleep with the guilt. I thought about teaching him to drive in the parking lot of the Methodist Church on Elm. I thought about his face when Piper was born, the way he'd cried without embarrassment, the way he'd looked at that baby like she was the most important thing that had ever happened. I thought about all of that, and then I called the non-emergency police line, and I reported the theft. The officer who came out was a young woman named Deputy Crane, and she was thorough and kind. She photographed the forced drawer, noted the missing documents, wrote down my account of the Thanksgiving incident, and told me she'd follow up. I asked her what the missing documents could be used for. She said that without originals, very little. Most institutions required certified copies from the court or the attorney's office, not personal file copies. But she said that wasn't really the point, was it? No, it wasn't the point. Martin called me the next morning, the Friday after Thanksgiving at 7:45. He said he'd gotten my text, he'd already spoken to his paralegal, and could I come in on Monday? I said yes. He said, "Wanda, in the meantime, call your bank and your financial advisor and let them know that no one is authorized to make changes or inquiries on your behalf, just as a precaution." He paused. Also, change your locks this weekend. Connie's son-in-law was a locksmith. He came that Saturday and replaced every lock in the house, including the back door and the door to the garage. I watched him work and felt something I hadn't felt in 7 months, something I'd almost forgotten. I felt like myself again. I met with Martin on Monday. We sat in his office with its wall of bookshelves and its framed Georgia State bar certificate and the small wooden duck on his desk that I'd always meant to ask about, and I told him everything from the October conversation through the Thanksgiving dinner, through the forced file box. He listened without interrupting, which is one of his best qualities, and when I finished he folded his hands and said, "All right, here's what I recommend." We spent 2 hours in that office. When I left, my will had an appointment for revision. My home had a new estate designation. My retirement accounts had updated beneficiary forms on file with the custodian, removing Trevor as primary and adding my niece Darlene and the Children's Hospital in Atlanta, where Piper had been treated for a respiratory infection 2 years earlier. We had begun the paperwork to establish a revocable trust that would be managed not by Trevor, but by a professional fiduciary and co-administered by Darlene. We had drafted a cease and desist letter to Trevor and Simone regarding the unauthorized access to my documents, and Martin had referred me to a colleague who handled personal injury claims regarding the incident at Thanksgiving. I didn't want to sue my son. I want to be clear about that. I didn't do any of this because I wanted to punish him. I did it because I finally understood that the person sitting in that lawyer's chair needing to be protected was me, and the only one who was going to do it was me. Trevor called 4 times the week after Thanksgiving. I let them go to voicemail. His messages started defensive. "Mom, Simone feels terrible. It was an accident. She'd had too much to drink." And moved into plaintive. "Mom, please, we need to talk about this." And eventually landed somewhere that I can only describe as entitled, "Mom, this is getting ridiculous. You're making this into something it isn't." I did not respond to any of them. Simone texted once. She said, "I'm sorry you were hurt," not, "I'm sorry I hurt you." There's a difference, and she knew it. My daughter-in-law's parents called from an unknown number, which I knew was them, because Vivienne's voice has a particular quality that I can only describe as expensive. She said they were concerned about the family situation. She said she hoped cooler heads would prevail. She said that family was family, and these things happened. I let her talk for about 45 seconds, and then I said, "Vivienne, I've retained counsel. If you'd like to discuss anything further, please have your attorney contact mine." Then I hung up. I won't pretend that felt bad. Piper called me the following Tuesday on her mother's phone to tell me that she'd lost her first tooth and that the tooth fairy had left her $3 and a note. I asked what the note said. She said it said, "Keep brushing." I laughed, genuinely, for the first time since before Thanksgiving. I told her I was proud of her. She said, "Grandma Wanda, are you coming to my Christmas show?" I said I wouldn't miss it. I haven't worked out all of that yet. How to keep Piper without keeping Simone. How to love my son while protecting myself from his choices. I don't have a clean answer. I suspect I won't for a while. Christmas was quiet. Connie came over and we watched old movies and made a lasagna and drank a bottle of Chianti that I'd been saving for no particular reason. She brought her dog, a fat beagle named Hendrix, and he and my dog ignored each other politely for 3 hours and then fell asleep touching. I thought that was something. I went to Piper's Christmas show. I sat in the second row of the Cartersville Elementary School auditorium on a folding metal chair with a paper program in my lap, and I watched my granddaughter stand in a line of 6-year-olds in construction paper antlers and sing Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer slightly behind the beat. She saw me from the stage, and her whole face opened up. That's the only way I can describe it. She waved both hands. I waved back. Trevor was there, on the other side of the auditorium. We made eye contact once, briefly. I nodded. He nodded back. Simone didn't look at me. That was fine. After the show, in the hallway full of coats and cookies and parents with phones out, Piper ran to me and wrapped both arms around my waist and said, "You came," like she hadn't been sure. That broke something open in me that I hadn't known was closed. I held her for a long moment and I said, "I will always come." The cease and desist letter was delivered to Trevor and Simone's condo the second week of December, along with formal notice from Martin's office that my estate documents had been revised and that any further unauthorized access to my personal files or financial accounts would result in legal action. The personal injury claim was filed with their homeowner's insurance, as Simone had acted within our shared residence at the time of the incident. Martin's colleague told me there would be a settlement, likely before spring. Trevor called the day. The letter arrived. He didn't leave a message this time. That night, I made Walter's pot roast again, even though it was just me. I set one place at the table, and I put his photograph on the chair across from mine, the one from our anniversary trip to Savannah in 2018, him laughing at something off camera with the river behind him, looking like himself. I poured 2 glasses of the good wine. I raised mine toward the photograph. I said, "I'm still here, sweetheart, and everything we built is still ours." Then I sat down and I had dinner with my husband, the way I'd had dinner with him 1,000 times before, in the house we'd paid for together, with the locks that only I had the keys to now. And for the first time in a long time, it felt like home again. I keep thinking about that moment in the bathroom mirror, wine dripping off my chin, welt rising on my cheekbone, and me just standing there looking at myself, not crying, not shaking, just looking. I think that was the moment I decided something, even if I couldn't name it yet. People talk about karma like it's some cosmic vending machine. You put in enough good behavior, and eventually something pops out the other end to reward you. I don't think it works like that. What I believe, after 68 years of living and 7 months of grieving and one very clarifying Thanksgiving dinner, is that the choices we make accumulate, not in the universe, in us. Trevor and Simone spent months making small choices. To pressure, to push, to take without asking, and each one made the next one easier, until throwing a wine glass at his mother's face somehow felt like a reasonable option to someone in that room. That's not bad luck. That's the direction they chose, one small step at a time. And I had been making choices too, choices to be patient, to give the benefit of the doubt, to hand over a key to my house because I trusted my own son. Some of those choices I'd make again, some of them I won't. What I learned, and I mean really learned, not just nodded at, is that doing the right thing doesn't mean doing the easy thing. The right thing for me was making those calls, sitting in Martin's office for 2 hours on a Monday morning and rebuilding every document from the ground up, walking into that elementary school auditorium at Christmas and sitting in the second row, even though I didn't know what Trevor's face would do when he saw me. The right thing was harder than saying yes to them would have been. It would have been so much simpler to just let them move in, let them have the access, avoid the conflict. But simple isn't the same as right, and I'm too old and too tired and too much Walter's wife to pretend otherwise. The clearest thing I can tell you is this: you cannot protect what matters to you if you refuse to think clearly about what threatens it. I could have spent those months after Walter died, drowning in grief and missing the pattern right in front of me. Instead, slowly, imperfectly, I paid attention. I asked Roberta. I called Martin. I noticed the open drawer. Grief wanted to make me soft and foggy, and I understand that impulse completely, but I couldn't afford it. Thinking clearly when everything in you wants to fall apart, that is its own kind of strength, and it's one I didn't know I had until I needed it. And then there's Piper, wrapping both arms around my waist in that hallway full of coats and cookie crumbs, saying you came like she wasn't sure I would. That's the thing I keep coming back to, not the lawyer's office, not the cease and desist letter, not the settlement paperwork. Piper's face. Whatever it costs me to stay in that little girl's life, I will pay it. That's not stubbornness. That's knowing what you're here for. I raised my glass to Walter's photograph that night, and I meant every word. We built something real together, and I'm still here to keep it.